There's nothing wrong about watching Netflix, right? It's about at the right time and place to watch Netflix, right? So, in fact, I want you to schedule time for that stuff. When people say, "Oh, I'm on social media too much," or "I find myself distracted at work because I'm thinking about this, that, or the other," turns out you can schedule that time and use it without guilt.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Nir Eyal on this show. He is a phenomenon. Nir writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. He's previously taught as a lecturer in marketing at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. And he's co-founded and sold 2 tech companies since 2003. He was dubbed by MIT Technology Review as the prophet of habit-forming technology. He's the author of 2 best-selling books, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Indistractable received critical acclaim, winning the Outstanding Works of Literature Award, as well as being named one of the best business and leadership books of the year by Amazon and one of the best personal development books of the year by Audible, The Globe and Mail, called Indistractable, the best business book of 2019. Nir's been featured in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, Time Magazine, and Psychology Today. He invests in habit-forming products that improve users' lives, and his past investments have included Eventbrite, Anchor.fm, Kahoot, Canva, Homelight, Product Hunt, Marco Polo, and many others. He attended the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Emory University. Nir, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
So let's talk first of all about how you went from helping companies figure out how to create habit-forming kind of addictions in users to helping users become kind of manipulatable in terms of their usage of such products.
Sure. Yeah. So let me start with some definitions. So nothing I ever wrote was for how to build addictions. Okay, an addiction is a persistent compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that harms the user. We would never want to build a product that is inherently and intentionally addictive. What we do want to build is a habit. What is a habit? A habit is simply an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. So unlike an addiction, which is never good, there's no such thing as a good addiction by definition. We can help users build good habits. And that's what Hooked was all about, is how do we get hooked to healthy habits? So for example, Kahoot uses the Hooked model to get kids hooked onto education. We can use the Hooked model to get people hooked onto exercise and well-being, as Fitbod does, a case study in the book as well. So there's all kinds of industries, from enterprise products to healthcare to fintech to edtech. All kinds of products have used my work to get people hooked for good. Now, the other side of the coin is that while we want to build good habits, we want to break bad habits. But these are 2 different products. Okay, let me be very clear. I have never worked for video game companies. I don't work with alcohol companies. I don't work with tobacco companies. I don't work with online gambling companies, because I don't want to help these type of companies build unhealthy addictions. These are the kind of products and services that I want people to get to stop using, to put in their proper place. And so Indistractable is about how do we, for all of us, and for every type of product, not just social media or gambling or whatever the case might be, how do we make sure that we do what we say we're going to do? So if Hooked is about how do we build good habits, Indistractable is about how do we break bad habits.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Now, if you looked at what Instagram is doing, or any of these other very habit-forming or addictive apps that people do get kind of unhealthily attached to, what are some of the common attributes or components of a software like Instagram's app?
Well, I would argue that any form of media, whether it's social media like Instagram or legacy media like the newspapers or cable news, all of these forms of content, all of these business models depend upon user engagement, right? We kind of tend to vilify the new products because we always morally panic about new technologies. But look, the New York Times, the paper of record, is never going to tell you you've had enough. And we have people, we call them news junkies, who are actually pathologically addicted to the news. We probably know some of these people in your own life who are just way too up to date on every little thing. That's too much, right? And so it's not just about the technology. It's more about how these things fit into our lives. Is keeping up to date on the news a good idea? Of course it is, but in moderation, like all things. And so I would argue that social media as well, from a user perspective, can be great. I can't tell you how many friends I keep in touch with because of these miraculous technologies that I get to use for free that help connect me to my readers, to my loved ones, to my friends and family. These tools are not inherently good or bad. It's about how we use them, which is why I'm trying to kind of shift the conversation away from waiting for the social media companies to do something about it, because that's never going to happen. And, waiting for the geniuses in Washington to do something about it. Good luck. Why hold your breath? If you hold your breath, you're going to suffocate. So what I want people to do is to realize, yes, these products are designed to hook you. I know, and I wrote the book Hooked. I know all their tricks. And I will tell you, they're good. They're not that good. Right? We like to think that these products are mind control. There's been a book written called, Stolen Focus. Well, that's ridiculous. Our attention is not being stolen. We're giving it away. And so we as consumers need to be very aware of how we can get the best out of these products without letting them get the best of us.
Yeah, that's great. And I love what you explain in Indistractable, that distraction is not the opposite of focus, but it's the opposite of traction. And that is such a powerful distinction. Can you elaborate a bit about that?
Sure thing. Yeah. So it's important to really understand where these words come from. And I realized that I didn't understand in my own life what distraction really meant. So I really started from first principles. And if you look at the origin of the word distraction, if you want to really know what distraction is, ask yourself, what is the opposite of distraction? Most people will tell you the opposite of distraction is focus, right? I don't want to be distracted. I want to be focused. But that's not exactly right. That the opposite of distraction is not focus. If you look at the origin of the word, the opposite of distraction is, of course, traction. Right? We have traction and distraction. I didn't realize that relationship until you see them kind of side by side, that they are in fact opposites. And we know that both words come from the Latin root trahare, which means to pull. And they both end in the same 6-letter word, ACTION, which spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us, but rather it is an action that we ourselves take. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, pulling you towards your values, pulling you towards becoming the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The opposite of traction, distraction, is any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, away from your values, away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this is really important. This isn't just semantics, because I would argue that any action that is done with intent, anything you plan to do in advance, is an act of traction. So we need to stop moralizing and medicalizing these perfectly fine behaviors. If you want to go on social media, if you want to watch Netflix, if you want to play a video game, there's nothing wrong with any of this stuff. Stop moralizing this, right? Why is I hear people saying, oh, as if, social media is so evil. And why is watching football on TV for 3 hours somehow better? There's no difference, right? In fact, I would much rather have people interacting with others than sitting by themselves watching a game on the boob tube, right? So anything you plan to do in advance with intent is traction. Conversely, anything that is not what you plan to do in advance is distraction. So even if that is a work-related task, and what I found in my 5 years of research working on this book is that the most dangerous forms of distraction are not the ones that we typically expect. Right? We think distraction comes from our phones, it comes from social media, it comes from, Twitter. Turns out the most pernicious form of distraction is the distraction we don't even realize is happening. For example, I used to sit down at my desk every morning and I would take a look at my to-do list. By the way, we can talk about why to-do lists are one of the worst things you can do for personal productivity. If you don't do it correctly, we can talk about that later. I would look at my to-do list and I'd say, okay, I've got that big important project I have to work on right now. Nothing's going to get in my way. Here I go. I'm going to get started. I'm going to focus. Nothing, no distractions, except let me just check email real quick, right? Let me just scroll through my Slack channels for a quick minute. Let me just get updated on the world news, because that's important. All this stuff is important for my business. I have to do this every day, right? I have to do this for my professional well-being. And what I didn't realize is that just because it's a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. That's the most dangerous kind of distraction, because those are the kind of tasks that trick you into prioritizing the urgent and the easy work at the expense of the hard and important work you have to do to move your life and career forward. So just because it's a work related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. That's the most terrible kind of distraction because you don't even realize that you're distracted. So that's this very important dichotomy between traction and distraction, revealing to us this is the big takeaway. I want everyone to write down who's listening. I want you to remember you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. I'll say that again. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you don't know what you wanted to do with your time and attention, everything's a distraction, right? You have no right to say you got distracted unless you knew in advance what it was that you wanted to do with your time. So just because you check email a lot or check Facebook a lot or whatever it is that you do too much, if you don't know what the alternative to that you would have done with your time and attention, then you can't say you got distracted. So this is why it's so critical. And one of the 4 steps to becoming indistractable is making time for traction by turning our values into time. And we can talk about exactly how to do that.
Yeah. I know this is a marketing show, but this is so important. And we did do an interview several years ago now on my other podcast, Get Yourself Optimized, episode 218. So getyourselfoptimized.com/218 for all this great stuff about becoming indistractable, because this is, I think, your superpower, like you, the listener's superpower. If you can become indistractable, you can achieve your dreams. It's not just, as Nir said, becoming more productive or more focused. It's about getting what you want out of life because you have traction. So yeah, let's shift over to marketing. But first, I want to mention a couple of things that I think are crucial to this conversation around being indistractable. One is I was reminded of something I learned from nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg. When you were talking about traction, I remembered the teaching he gave that said, "Do not should all over yourself."
Mm.
Because we do that a lot, and you know, when you were talking about moralizing, I was thinking about that statement, "Don't shit all over yourself," because that's the moralization. Like, I know I shouldn't be watching this Netflix show. I know I shouldn't watch yet another episode of it. I should go to bed. Well, stop shooting all over yourself. Stop moralizing, and just get in touch with what you actually want, and then make your choices.
Very well said. Right. There's nothing wrong about watching Netflix, right? It's about at the right time and place to watch Netflix, right? So, in fact, I want you to schedule time for that stuff. When people say, "Oh, I'm on social media too much," or "I find myself distracted at work because I'm thinking about this, that, or the other," turns out you can schedule that time and use it without guilt, right? So, one of the things that I think very few people have actually experienced is what real leisure feels like. Because even the problem is that unless you follow these techniques to become indistractable, even when you have leisure time, even when you're with your kids or you want to watch something on Netflix or you just want to relax and do nothing, even when you do that, you're still thinking about all the unfinished tasks, right? You're still thinking about all the stuff you haven't finished on your to-do list. And so you don't actually enjoy true leisure. Whereas an indistractable person has on their schedule, hey, this is time to be with my family, or this is time to go on social media, and they can do so without guilt.
Yeah. So good. So good. Now, I do want to also circle back to what you said about to-do lists. Can you elaborate a bit about how bad they are?
Sure.
Just to preface this, by the way, I have 8,000, well, at least 6,000. I haven't actually counted them because my to-do list manager, which is called Things by Cultured Code, doesn't actually give me the entire number, just the number in the inbox. And anyways, it's probably around 6,000
6,000
items in my to-do list. So I know that's insane. I know
6,000
that's,
items in your to-do list.
yeah, it's draining my energy.
Wow.
It's terrible. I know. And I'm a pack rat. I am a
Okay.
hoarder when it comes to my ideas and my, next actions and someday maybes and all that. I'm speaking in GTD speak, so
I love it.
I do understand productivity and how it works and time management and so forth. I can give presentations about it, but I'm not actually applying it. I'm using this to-do list as a place to park everything in under the sun and not culling it. And I know that's bad.
Amen. Well, so okay. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's this technique's fault, right? I think it's a fatal flaw of this to-do list method, in that to-do lists have no constraints. They have no constraints. As you said, you have 6,000 items on your to-do list. You can add more and more and more and more. And the problem with that, Stefan, is that when you, like many of us, like I used to be, live under this tyranny of the to-do list, we come home from work. It's been a busy day. We've worked our butts off. And yet, here are all these things that we said we would do that we didn't do. So, what does that do to one's psyche if day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, you are reinforcing that you made promises to yourself that you didn't keep? Loser, right? That starts to take a psychic toll. And so people start saying silly things like, well, I'm no good at time management. No, it's not that you're no good at time management, it's that this technique is no good. And so that's one fatal flaw. The second fatal flaw with to-do lists is that to-do lists have no feedback loop. You see, people tend to fall into what's called a planning fallacy. The planning fallacy says that on average, and studies have confirmed this, a task will take you 3 times longer than you estimate, okay, on average. The problem is when we use a to-do list, there's no feedback loop to tell us how long things take, as opposed to a much better way, which is what I propose. And this is not, I didn't make this up, make up this technique. This has been shown in thousands of peer-reviewed studies. This is the most widely studied time management technique, the most effective technique we know of, which is called time boxing, which is essentially using what's called setting an implementation intention, which is a fancy way of saying planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. When you do that, when you set aside that time for here's what I want to spend time doing, that has been shown to be much more effective. Now, I take it to another level. You've probably heard of time boxing before. Here's what's new. Here's what my research reveals. That what I want you to do is when you make that time box, when you set in your schedule, I'm going to work on XYZ, or I'm going to do whatever it is I'm going to do with my time and attention. When I set that time, the goal is not to finish. Okay? The goal is not to finish. You see, so many of us have been trained with the to-do list method to think that we are good people, that we're productive when we check off cute little boxes. And what that leads to, and we've all been there, is either working on the wrong tasks, because we know the number one, the worst distraction is a perfectly done task that you didn't need to do. And what to-do lists incentivize is checking off cute little boxes. I've actually known people who will finish a task, but they forgot to write on their to-do list, so they'll write on their to-do list just so they can check it off, right? Like, that's how insane this methodology is. So the goal with my methodology is not to finish the task. The goal is to work on that task or do that thing that you wanted to do for as long as you said you would. So if you said, hey, I want to do 30 minutes with this presentation, or I want to spend 30 minutes doing my sales calls, or I want to spend an hour with my family without distraction, whatever the case might be, the goal is to do that thing, whatever it is that you put on your calendar, for as long as you said you would, without distraction. That's it. That's all you got to do. Work on that thing without distraction for as long as you said you would. It doesn't matter if you finish. Why? Because unlike the to-do list methodology, which people say, okay, finish this, finish that, finish that. That's what to-do lists are full of, things that you want to finish, the output. What this technique makes you focus on is the input, right? The output is the task, the thing you want to have done. The input is 2 things, time and attention. So by just prioritizing the input, the time and the attention, it turns out people who use this methodology finish more. Believe it or not, people who don't focus on finishing actually complete more than the to-do list people. Why? Because here's what happens to the typical to-do list user. This is what used to happen to me all the time. I'd work on a task for 5 minutes and then, oh, I got to check that thing. Let me just do that real quick before I forget. Or, oh, and now I got to check email. And now there's a tap on the shoulder and I got to do this real quick. And then, oh, wait, what was I working on again? Okay, I'm going to get back to that 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe an hour later. And of course, we know it takes you about 20 minutes to get back into that task. So your whole day is spent just getting through these reactive work tasks as opposed to truly reflecting on the task at hand. As opposed to the people who are indistractable, when they work on that task and only that task without distraction, now they can determine how much they accomplished in that unit of time. So I can say to myself, okay, I needed to make 100 sales calls and I got through in 30 minutes, I got through 10. Okay. Or I need to make a slide presentation for a client and the slide presentation is going to be about 30 slides long and I got through about three. Okay. Well, that means that about 10% of the task was completed in that time box. And now I can extrapolate how much time that task is going to take. So now I'm freeing myself from the planning fallacy, which is what plagues people who use the to-do list. They don't ever figure out how long tasks take. So there's no feedback loop. Whereas a time box schedule, you learn over time, okay, this task takes me about XYZ minutes. I'm going to go ahead and put that time in my calendar so that I can meet the deadline, as opposed to what most people do. What I used to do is procrastinate, delay, distract, and then right before the deadline, work like crazy. And we know what happens. Our work output severely suffers.
Yeah, this reminds me of what I learned from reading Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. And I interviewed him on Get Yourself Optimized. Great interview. There's this concept I had learned from him and from his work called attention residue. So if you're task switching throughout the day, you not only lowered your productivity while you were at work, but you also carried that home. And so part of your brain is occupied with some of these other tasks. And it takes, I think, at least 20 some minutes for that other thing that you were working on, or things that you were working on, to clear and for you to be fully present.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, this is a funny thing that popped in my mind related to the whole to-do list thing. I read some books to my 3-year-old son that are really cute, and they're Frog and Toad it's like 1972. It's an old book series, and one of the books is called Frog and Toad Together. And my favorite little story from that book is A List. That's the name of it, and it's about Toad creates a to-do list, and he writes on his to-do list: wake up, get out of bed, brush teeth, eat breakfast, and so forth. And he's crossing these things out as he's going through his day. And then he gets to Frog's house, and he's got the list in his pocket, and they go for a walk. And then he crosses out, go for a walk with Frog. And then as he's crossing that out, the wind takes the list and blows it away. And he becomes powerless to get anything done the rest of the day. He won't even budge. Chases after the list, can't catch it, comes back, and Toad's like, I can't remember what my next thing on the list is, so I'm going to just sit here. Finally, at the end of the day, Frog says, okay, let's just go to sleep, and without even going home. And Toad's like, that was the last thing on my list, and so he writes it in sand with a stick. Go to sleep, and then crosses it out, and then they go to sleep. So that just shows how you give your power away to to-do lists. It's not empowering, it's actually disempowering.
So it's interesting how Toad has this need to be told what to do with his time, and he's powerless unless he's told through a list what to do. Now, that was written a long time ago, before email. And I would argue that most workers these days are toads, but we don't use to-do lists. Most of us are checking our email inbox, right? I don't know what to do right now. What do I do? Somebody tell me what to do. Okay, let me just check email. Email will tell me what to do. And that is a massive mistake, because that's a form of what we call reactive work. Work can be separated into two types of work. We have reactive work and reflective work. Reactive work is reacting to emails, reacting to messages, reacting to notifications, and that's part of everybody's day. Of course, it's going to be part of your day. The problem is that people can get habituated to responding to all that reactive work, and they get very comfortable there, because thinking is hard work. Thinking is typically the hardest part of a white-collar worker's job, right? What we get paid to do is come up with novel ideas to hard problems. That is the definition of white-collar work. So what most people unfortunately do is they complain about getting distracted all day, but they make no time for reflective work. And reflective work is the kind of work you can only do without distraction. Planning, strategizing, being creative, thinking requires you to plan time for reflective work. So as opposed to being like Toad and saying, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Let me check email because I don't want to think for myself, right? All Toad had to do was sit down for a second and say, wait a minute, what do I want to do with my time? What's important to me? which is why we have to start with our values, by the way. But for the workplace, when we make that time for reflective work, even if it's 30 minutes, that's fine. 45 minutes, maybe an hour of your day, maybe more. You've got to put that time for reflective work, or else you're going to find yourself running real fast in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's so good, so good. I really needed these reminders because I know this stuff that I can't let things like my email dictate my day. You know, that's somebody else's priorities. Those aren't my priorities. And I also get caught up in bad habits. Yeah. So thank you for the reminders.
I want you to remember we're all part of this club, right? I wrote this book. Why do you think it took me 5 years to write this book? Because I kept getting distracted, right? I wrote this book for me more than anyone else. And it wasn't until I really stopped and looked at these techniques and looked at the research. I really started from first principles, because the first thing I did, I read all the books on this topic. And all the books out there kind of tell you the same thing. It's technology's fault, right? Stop using so much technology. I don't agree, right? This is where Cal Newport and I have some disagreements. I think he's great. I like a lot of what he says. We agree on. Time boxing is one of them. But his claims around how technology is a source of the problem, I really think it's about how we use these technologies. And I don't want people to be Luddites. I don't, it's very easy for a tenured professor to say, stop using social media. Cal doesn't use social media. Well, thanks a lot, but that's kind of something only a tenured professor can say for most people. If you're a social media manager, how do you stop using social media? You can't, right? So you have to learn how to use this stuff in a way that serves you rather than hurts you. And so I think we need to stop blaming the technology, realizing that the technology is very powerful and is designed to hook you. No doubt about it. Again, I wrote the book Hooked. I know all their tricks. But I think the part that's lost in this translation is that we kind of wait for someone to fix this for us. And I'm here to tell people that you are far more powerful than these technologies. You just have to take some small steps to put them in their place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff indeed. All right, so let's move to a marketing conversation now. I would love to kind of unpack how you've built such an incredible and credible personal brand. You're speaking to Mind Valley's audience. You've got a quest published there. You've done just some incredible personal brand stuff that I'd love to dive into a bit more. And yeah, I just also am really impressed with the kinds of partnerships and relationships that you have from a marketing and reach perspective. So let's talk about that.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I mean, I wish I could tell you it was planned and could tell you the steps I took to get there, but it really was a random walk. I mean, I think if there's one thing that has really helped me in my writing career is that I always follow this mantra of following my curiosity. That's always been my North Star, is what am I curious about? There's what's that Dorothy Parker quote, that the cure for boredom is curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity. That's such a motivator to me, is just answering my own questions, right? Finding, and this is something I wrote about in my first book, Hooked, around variable rewards. How we know that intermittent reinforcement, this comes out of the work of B.F. Skinner. Everyone who's taken a Psych 101 class remembers B.F. Skinner, where he did these experiments on intermittent rewards. And it turns out that what keeps us engaged, whether it's with a slot machine, whether it's watching sports on TV, whether it's the news, all of these things have an element of variability. So knowing that, what I try and pursue in my life is those unanswered questions. That's, for me, the variable reward, is looking for the answers. I don't write books because I have the answer. I write books because I'm looking for the answer. And I think for certain readers, they really appreciate that. All my books are not only, they're full of anecdotes, and of course these techniques work for me personally, but they're also backed with peer-reviewed studies. So there's 30 pages of citations in each one of my books to peer-reviewed journals. I don't like the books that are just like, oh, this worked for me, so it's going to work for you. That's nice, but yeah, I want to see the studies too. So following my curiosity has just been, always been my path with all my writing. And I basically try and write to solve my problems. And when I don't see books that solve those problems well, then every 5 years or so, I need to write, or find the answer by myself. And thankfully, there's lots of problems to solve. So I never run out of material.
Awesome. And so, what would be something that when you followed your curiosity, something quite surprising happened? Maybe looking backwards, you can kind of connect the dots and say, yeah, that was totally meant to be. But at the time, it just caught you by surprise.
Well, I think so. The whole idea of becoming a published author. I mean, I started two tech companies, and I after the second one was acquired, I decided to take a break and look for what I would do next. And part of that was realizing the importance of habits. So for me, I could see that this was back in 2012. So remember, the iPhone was only, 4 years old at that point. And I remember looking at the tech landscape. Both my previous companies were in the tech landscape. And so I realized that as the interface shrank, right, as we went from desktops with big screens to laptops with slightly smaller screens to mobile devices, and now wearable devices like the Apple Watch, and now even more recently, the screen has all but disappeared, right? If you think about Amazon Alexa with these voice interface devices, the screen has completely disappeared. And so what that means, as the screen shrank and then finally disappeared, habits became increasingly important. Because, for example, take on the phone, if you don't exist on someone's home screen and they don't have a habit, you don't exist, right? Because there's just less real estate for those external triggers to tell people what to do. So back when we used to have huge monitors on our desks, you could ping and ding people to remind them to do something with external triggers. Well, as the interface shrank and disappeared, there is much less space for those external triggers to give people information for what to do next, which means you have to build a habit. And so what I wanted to do was to figure out, okay, well, if I know habits are going to be important, how do I build habits? And I just didn't see that book on the shelf. I looked for it, I couldn't find that book. So I decided to do research into it. And first I started blogging about it, not thinking I would write a book about it, but just blogging for myself. And then one of my professors at Stanford saw one of my blog posts, and he liked the model, and he invited me to teach a class with him at Stanford, and he kind of gave me carte blanche to teach the Hook model. And so that became a class at Stanford, and then later at the design school at the Hasselplaner Institute of Design. And yeah, that whole process, strings together like a good story, and looks like it was, planned out, but none of it was. And of course, the transition to Indistractable, it was because I got so busy with consulting work and speaking opportunities and investing using my Hook methodology that I was so busy, and I didn't have time to do the thing that made me successful in the first place, which was the writing. And so I was getting distracted from my writing, which is what I really enjoy and made me successful. And so that's why I wanted to write Indistractable, is to figure out, wait a minute, what happened here? I'm not doing the thing that I really wanted to do with my time and attention. So it kind of, one thing kind of led to the other by happenstance more than a plan.
How did you end up doing a quest for Mind Valley?
Oh, Vishen just reached out. He saw my material somewhere, I don't even know where, and just emailed me and said, what do you think about doing an Indistractable quest together?
Oh, awesome. Are you familiar with Mind Valley's other quests and other Mind Valley subject matter experts?
A few, yeah. I know Jim Quick does one over there, and I've seen there's a life book that I've seen there. But yeah, do you use it a lot?
I'm a Mind Valley Pro member. I have gone through some of your course. I haven't completed it. I have to tell you, I did get distracted quite a lot. I like consuming online courses and things like that, and books, etc., but I don't tend to finish them. And I'll have to share this because it just was such a profound thing I just learned maybe a couple weeks ago. It's called the Spiritual Flywheel. I learned it from David Guillaume, who is co-founder of Mary Ruth's Organics, which is 25 million customers. It's huge. It's really, really successful. And yeah, what? So he's also a Kabbalah teacher, and he was one of my Kabbalah teachers when I was living in LA. So in this prosperity mastery course, he explained the spiritual flywheel, which relates very much to some of the stuff we've been talking about. He said that if you get 95% of the way complete with the project, but you're not fully complete. It's only 95% of the way there, or even 99% of the way there. You would get, let's say, 95 units of energy. You would receive 95 units of light for that work, but you wouldn't get to the finish line yet. And so you wouldn't get all of the units of energy. Well, there's not just 5 units of energy left for you to complete the project. You'll get 10,000 units of energy by going that last 5% or 1% to finish it. And that just really stuck with me, because the flywheel, it takes, you have to overcome the inertia to get the momentum going. But once the momentum's going with the flywheel, it just keeps going and going and going, and you'll get more projects completed, more energy. It just releases all this pent up potential energy and turns it into kinetic energy, into motion that will propel your life forward and give you so much light from above. It's just so powerful. And that just, I think, is very relevant to what we've been talking about with distraction and traction.
Yeah, there is a euphoric feeling when you actually can see the thing that you said you were going to do manifest. Now, I would add to that that the difficulty of big projects is that you don't get that feeling until the end, and that's very difficult, right? If you ask folks why losing weight is so difficult, or why saving money, or why starting a business, or why writing a book is so difficult, it's that you have to work for so long before you see any payoff, because people again are measuring themselves by the finishing, by the checking off the box. And that's what we need to change. How do we change that? We change that by referring back to that system I told you about earlier, of celebrating and measuring yourself, not on whether you finished the task, but did you do what you said you were going to do for as long as you said you would without distraction? It's such a killer insight. It's not about finishing. It's about celebrating the success of, I said I was going to watch that online course for 30 minutes because that's what was in my schedule, and I did it. That's what's to be celebrated. Those small wins. Sometimes I sit down at my desk, I write maybe 3 words, right? Nothing, I didn't finish, but I celebrate the success that I had the discipline to sit down at my desk and be a professional author and do my job, which is to sit here. My job isn't to finish the book. My job is to write every day. And if you can measure yourself based on that metric of, did I do what I said I was going to do without distraction for as long as I said I would, you will invariably, inevitably achieve those outcomes. But if you only wait for the outcome at the end, that's very difficult. Most people don't have the wherewithal to sustain through difficult tasks. Easy tasks, fun tasks, that's great, right? Nobody has a problem. There's this concept of flow, which is very nice, but it's like work in Hollywood, right? Good work if you can get it. It's very nice to have flow. And when you think about, Csikszentmihalyi wrote this seminal book on flow. He talks about, and there's some people who still sell courses and all kinds of stuff around this concept. He talks about, basketball players and surfers and people who are enjoying what they're doing, right? That's great. It's easy to get into flow and stuff I like doing. What about doing my taxes? How do I get into flow doing my taxes? I hate doing my taxes. So that kind of stuff, you can't measure yourself only by, is it done? Because you're going to procrastinate. You need to measure yourself by, hey, I worked on it for 15 minutes. That's great. Because guess what? If you work on it for 15 minutes, enough times, you're going to get it done.
That reminds me of something I learned from Dr. Robert Cialdini. Bob is how he goes. And by the way, do you know who I'm talking about, right? The author of Influence?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Persuasion.
Yeah.
Or influence, sorry.
Yeah. So he's a master of persuasion. He wrote Influence, and then he wrote Persuasion as a follow-up book. And anyway, so he explained this recently in a Genius Network meeting. I'm part of Genius Network. He said, instead of congratulating, let's say, your employee or your colleague, your friend, on their progress, if you congratulate them on their commitment, you will get so much more out of them, because now they're forward looking towards the outcome and the goal, instead of looking in the rearview mirror at how far they've come.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we can actually apply that to our personal lives as well. As one of my mantras is consistency over intensity. Consistency over intensity in almost all things, right? That when we think about intensity, people are, okay, after New Year's, I have a New Year's resolution. I'm going to lose weight or I'm going to work my business. And, they make these New Year's resolutions January 1st. And by February 1st, they've kind of forgot about them because they were super intense, as opposed to consistency, right? Which is very aligned to Cialdini's concept here. It's about how can I put in that effort consistently, that commitment over the long term is really how we achieve everything worth having in life.
So, what other partnerships are you cooking up, or do you have besides the Mind Valley one?
There's always something in the hopper, but we'll see what comes to fruition. There's I've got a few book ideas I'm working on, and yeah, it's too early to say at this point. But
Okay.
there's I'm mostly focused on my own curiosities. That's kind of still my mantra.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I've got a few different book projects in the hopper right now. One is about to get birthed. It's the fourth edition of The Art of SEO, so that's great. It's not going to be a full 1,000 pages like the last edition was, 994 pages. It's funny how fewer books sell when you make the book even bigger and bigger with each edition. So yeah, this one's a little less kind of daunting, but the things I'm most passionate about, talking about curiosity, are the book projects that relate to spirituality and personal development. Like, for example, I'm working on a children's book. I'm working on a memoir about awakenings and living in a friendly universe. So it's yeah, it's fun to birth amazing passion projects and turn them into something.
Yeah, fantastic. By the way, with your SEO work, are you do you have any predictions around how LLMs will change the future of SEO?
Oh, for sure. We have a chapter in the new edition all about generative AI and how you can utilize it for SEO. Everything from grouping keywords, and you don't even have to give it the categories. It will just come up with the categories for you, and it's a really good first draft to writing content, to even having it come up with code. You can tell it, things relating to like hreflang tags or whatever, and it will generate those for you. And yeah, it's really a powerful tool for that sort of work. But there's also the question of, will LLMs put my traditional search out of business? And my take on that is no. And my co-author is also similarly, because it's not that LLMs replace search. You still have to get to this massive repository of information. Somebody has to get to your near and far website and read that blog post. And I don't want an LLM to go in between and try and summarize your brilliance and get it wrong, because these LLMs just make stuff up, the hallucinations. So you have to be very careful about trusting, overly trusting these tools. So people will still want to get from point A to point B in the most efficient way possible. That means Google is not going away, or they're not replacing traditional search with Bard or SGE or anything anytime soon.
Yeah, I do think that there will be certain types of searches that will just make sense not to search on Google for anymore. For example, my daughter had a homework assignment in her world history class, something like how did the Ottoman Empire resist technological advancement, and compare that to the Luddite movement. We typed like she tried to type something like that into Google, and she spent forever looking for an answer. Infinite amount. She couldn't find the answer. Essentially, googling something like that. She types it into ChatGPT, and it spits out a beautiful answer. Now, may not be accurate. Like we actually had to ask it, please cite sources, and then it did actually provide sources, which we could then link back to and be like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
So that's a different kind of search, though. Do you see how that's that search.
It's a question. You're right. It's not traditional like SEO.
It's a prompt that led to a response that in after your follow-up request gave you citations which were essentially search results.
Right, right. But it's interesting that I do think that will change the game for certain types of search results. There will be a layer, right? The UX won't be a bunch of blue links on a page, which I think will be primitive in a few years. It'll be asking an agent to find you the best source, and then send you. But that gives those guys a tremendous amount of power, right? Because now they're just recommending one or two, not a user scrollable page.
Yeah, you're gonna absolutely gonna need to have a personal agent, your own trusted AI representing you and having access to all this profile information, all this repository of your own data, so that it can act on your behalf rather than relying on Google or any other big tech company to make these decisions for you around what is the best thing to surface and present to you.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that's where it's all going? Well, we're all gonna have like a her, like from the movie in our.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, yeah. I could see that.
Yeah. Interesting times ahead, right?
Yeah, yeah. It sure is. It's amazing at the same time. I mean, it's these times of dramatic technological change always cause moral panics and a lot of fear. But it's also important to keep our wits about us and ask, wait a minute, how much good can this do? And it's a tremendous amount of good. Like I saw this study recently about how an LLM is much better at bedside manner than doctors. Doctors are really bad at giving bedside manner, and if they just read the script from this LLM, they could do a much better job treating their patients. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? That's just more of like a customer experience type role. But there's so much that these LLMs are doing for us that I think kind of goes underreported because we're so scared of AI taking over the world.
Yeah, and to look at where we're at now is impressive, and as you said, there's these LLMs figuring out all sorts of things in relation to health and early detection of diseases and all sorts of stuff. But we got to skate to where the puck is going to be at, not where it's at now. So even in just 2 years' time, what is the landscape? It's going to be completely different. I remember this as prediction or analysis from Ray Kurzweil, where he said that the last 100 years of technology advance at today's rate of change, which is much faster now than it was 100 years ago, at today's rate of change, the last 100 years would actually fit into the next 20 years. But because it's going to continue to advance, then it would only fit into the next 12. 100 years ago, people would think you're insane if you described the kinds of technologies. It'd sound like science fiction or fantasy. Imagine that in 12 years from now. It's just mind boggling.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't think it's going to change as much as people think. In that, if you think about certain industries, have not budged an inch. Right? We went from the Wright brothers to the moon in what, less than 100 years, but from the jumbo jet to now, nothing's happened. Aviation hasn't changed much at all for civil aviation. I mean, I got my pilot's license. My father was a pilot. I got my pilot's license back in 1996. The airplanes that we fly today are Cessnas, just like they were. Many of them are actually made still in the 1970s and 1960s. We still fly them today. Nothing has changed. So we have to be very careful. I think this is I think and by the way, not that we could not have changed. There could have been massive change. Look, we went to supersonic flight for passenger travel, and then we went backwards. Right now, there's no Concorde anymore. This amazing achievement, but stalled out. We didn't go down that path because of regulation. And not that the regulation was bad. A lot of the regulation was very good, right? Sound ordinances and this and that, and the impracticalities and fuel costs, et cetera. But we also need to be wary that not everything is going to evolve at the same time, right? These 12 years of change, 100 years change in 12 years is not going to be evenly spread. It's going to happen only in some industries and not others.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a great divide in who benefits from this. So there's a fantastic book by Neil Stephenson called The Diamond Age. Have you read it?
No.
Oh, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. What's the gist?
It's about the coming age of nanotechnology, molecular nanotechnology, where these nano machines can self-replicate. So that'll be a huge tectonic shift for society. And it, the subtitle of the book is A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer. She has a primer, like a tablet type of a device that is her best friend. It is super smart. It is helping her navigate through the world. She's, I think, an orphan or somehow like ends up on her own, and it helps her like get out of different mortal dangers and things. And it's nanotechnology it's fascinating. I don't want to give too much away, but I would highly recommend you read that book because it will get you thinking so big and into what's possible because this is coming up fast. Yeah, so it's exciting times, but also for some terrifying because they see the universe as unfriendly. That the dystopian futures that they see on these sci-fi movies, it just feels like an inevitability, and then they just kind of resign themselves to some terrible Mad Max fate, and think I don't know. Anyways,
And I understand it. It's hard to fight against, but we need to remember two things. One, that we have a negativity bias, right? That we know that uh, bad things draw our attention more than the promise of good things. That's the first problem. And that's very dangerous because we only think about the crimes of commission versus omission. We only think about the terrible things that happen. We don't think about all the good that could have happened if the technology was around, right? We don't count the unsaved lives. We don't count all the potential good because we don't see it. It was an opportunity cost, not a real cost. So that's one big problem. And two, because of that negativity bias, there is an industrial complex of the media feeding into that, right? There is an industry of people who want you to be scared. And they because they know that's what gets attention. That's what gets eyeballs, right? The first rule of journalism is if it bleeds, it leads. So there's a whole industry of people who want to scare the crap out of you. And that's very, very dangerous, right? Nobody tells you that, hey, there wasn't any plane crashes again today. That doesn't make headline news. Only the big fiery crashes do. But the beauty of the human race and our civilization is that we adapt, right? Even when there is bad, right? Paul Virilio said, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. But we don't stop sailing ships. We made ships better. We made them safer, not by not sailing them, but by improving them through technology. That's what makes standards of living better. And so it's very, very hard to keep your wits about you in this age when everybody is telling you about fear and loathing and all the disasters that are to come. And of course, Hollywood feeds into this and the media feeds into this, that by and large, like I'm pretty optimistic. Who knows, right? I'm sure there are going to be some disasters. 100% there will be disasters. But there will also be a heck of a lot of good done from all this.
Yeah, for sure. So stay positive. Things are looking up, I think. So, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, the way that the universe works. Anyways, I know we're out of time. So if our listener or viewer wants to learn more from you, of course, reading your book, or books, both of them, but especially Indistractable. If they want to follow your blog, take your courses, where should we send them?
Sure. So my blog is at nirandfar.com. That's spelled Nir, like my first name, nirandfar.com. And my first book is called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And my second book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nir. This was a lot of fun. And you're such a light in the world. So keep doing what you're doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
And thank you, listener. Now go be a light in the world, and we'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.